When Ashley Martinez went to the pool one summer day, her family had no idea that would be the last time they would see her. Though this case took the investigators across the country to find their person of interest, none of the leads have, so far, helped to find Ashley. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines and another bonus episode for this December. This is a case that I covered back when I was doing some YouTube videos years ago. So like 120 of you have heard the original coverage I did. My friend Jess helped me out with the research on it back then, but of course I want to update it since it has been a few years and a little bit more information has come out that was actually released not long after I did the YouTube video, so it's a good time to cover this. Though I have not covered this case here on my main platform before, it is a case that is almost always on my mind because it happened in my area-ish. From downtown Kansas City to downtown St. Joseph, Missouri, it's just under an hour drive. And in the world of long-term missing persons cases, this is one that does not get enough attention, or at least not enough national attention. The local St. Joseph news outlet, News Press Now, has done their absolute best to keep covering the case over the years. It's actually really nice to see. The usual anniversary coverage that they do isn't just a short little write-up. It's usually a very nice piece about Ashley, her family, and it brings awareness to the case. So today we are talking about Ashley Renee Martinez, who was born in January of 1989 to parents Abel and Tammy. She was the only girl in the family with a half-brother, as well as an older brother and a younger brother who she grew up with. Ashley was a smart and funny child who grew into an opinionated teenager, as bright and witty children often do. As such, she did have some conflict with her mom and her stepfather, who had rules in the house that she didn't always want to follow. But at some point, it became apparent to her family that her behavior was outside the norm, even when we're talking about teenage conflict. So they went ahead and sought outside help. And that's when Ashley was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Ashley did fairly well on her medication, but when she wasn't taking it, she would be impulsive and reckless. And her mom has even said she would be a danger to herself because of that. And this is pretty much in line with what we know about bipolar disorder. People do take risks that they might not otherwise take. And that was definitely true for Ashley. An example of one of these behaviors was in 2001, when she was 12 and she ran away from home. Most 12-year-olds know that they can't exactly fend for themselves, and it looks like Ashley was not prepared for the reality of running away because she came back a day later. But that impulsivity and risky behavior was exactly what the family was hoping the medication would help with. And it mostly did, as well as also balancing Ashley's mood swings and reactions, or rather overreactions to things. All of this helped Ashley grow closer to her brothers, and things were going pretty well for her. In May of 2004, Ashley was 15 years old and she just finished up middle school. Her mom took her around the same time to adopt a long-haired gray cat who Ashley named Coco. Between the new cat and the summer off of school, Ashley seemed really happy. On July 6th, 2004, Ashley wanted to go hang out at the local community pool, which was a pretty regular activity for her. Before she left the house, though, she and her older brother, who was just about 2 years older than her, got into a bit of an argument. It's not clear how it started, but he was worried about Ashley taking rides with people she didn't know, or at least people she didn't know well. And he was being the protective older brother and telling her not to do it. But if you think teens don't like being told what to do by their parents, it's just as bad, if not worse, when an older sibling does it. So they had a verbal back and forth about it before their mom drove Ashley and her younger brother, who was 13, to the pool. When she dropped them off, she left Ashley with the usual instructions: keep an eye on your brother, and I'll be back in a few hours to pick you up. While at the pool, Ashley was swimming and hanging out with friends for a couple of hours. At some point, she left, and one friend assumed that she had gone to a nearby convenience store to get snacks or drinks, and she would be back before long. But then Ashley didn't come back. When her mother Tammy came back to pick Ashley and her brother up, only Ashley's brother was there. Tammy asked him where Ashley was, and at first he said he didn't know. And that's what you'll read in the early reporting on the case, that he didn't see anything. But after some time, he thought back to the last time he saw Ashley at the pool, and he remembered seeing her get into a car. As any parent would, Tammy assumed this was nothing more than Ashley leaving the pool without permission. But when she didn't hear from Ashley and couldn't find her even after calling all of her friends, Tammy reported her missing to the police, where she was listed as a missing runaway, which was consistent with what they assumed at the time. But as the days went by with no word from Ashley, Tammy started to worry something else happened. Even though Ashley had that one instance of running away 3 years before this, Ashley didn't usually do more than break curfew. And with how much she loved her cats and how close she was to her brothers, Tammy couldn't see why she would stay away for so long. Ashley had also left behind her things, even her medication, both for her bipolar disorder, but also her inhaler for asthma. Those were still at the house. At some point, Ashley's disappearance was changed to endangered runaway. A missing runaway is a minor who left their home without permission. They are staying away of their own accord, and there are no urgent or critical concerns. Endangered means that they left without permission, but there is evidence something else is at play. Sometimes they will be listed as endangered simply because they are very young, like an 11-year-old who runs away. Sometimes it could be a situation like Ashley's, where they leave behind important medications and that they are in some type of danger without them. And sometimes it can be changed because the police believe they left of their own free will, but something or someone is stopping them from returning home. In this case, the investigation led the police to the name of a person they believed Ashley left the pool with. Using a friend's cell phone from the pool, Ashley contacted a man named Christopher Hart. And I'm saying man because he was 32 years old. Just a reminder, Ashley was 15. Ashley's mother had no idea who this guy was, but Ashley's friends, of course, knew about him. He lived near Ashley's family, and she met him one day either while she was out walking or possibly at the pool. The friend said that she would go see Chris on days her mom thought she was at the pool, and Ashley had even talked about how Chris was going to help her get out to California. It sounds like Chris and Ashley had been making active plans towards this, which was quite alarming because not only was Chris more than twice Ashley's age, he also had a criminal record for some violent offenses as well as drug-related offenses. At the time Ashley disappeared, he was on probation for a second-degree assault conviction, and he was ordered to wear an ankle monitor. At a June 1st hearing in 2004, they found that he was in violation of the terms of his release, and so at the time Ashley disappeared, Chris was at risk of going back to prison. And this was not going to be a short stint. We're talking a significant number of years behind bars. When Chris initially pleaded guilty to that second-degree assault charge, the sentence was 15 years, but he was enrolled in a program that would suspend that sentence if he completed a quote-unquote shock incarceration that included a drug treatment program. And we're not talking 28 days or even a 90-day program. It was 15 months of drug rehabilitation. When Chris successfully completed this program in November of 2003, he was released on 3 years of probation. If he successfully stayed out of trouble for 3 years, something he hadn't really done up to this point, and spoiler, won't do after this point either, but if he managed it this time, he wouldn't have to serve the rest of his sentence. But if he violated the terms of his probation in any significant way, he was facing the remaining 13 years he had yet to serve. And then Chris barely made it 6 months before he violated the terms of his probation and was placed on house arrest. 2 days after Ashley went missing, Chris failed to appear for a hearing, and then on July 22nd, at a continuance of this hearing, he again did not show up. So a warrant was issued for his arrest. According to the earliest reporting on this case, the investigation showed that shortly before Ashley left the pool, Chris had removed his ankle monitor. They didn't know where he was, but he and his father's gray 1995 Pontiac Bonneville disappeared the same day Ashley did. Based on the information that the investigators had, they believed Chris may have gone to Olympia, Washington, which is where he had family. They sent information about him up to Olympia, and eventually it was realized that Chris was not only in the state, but he had already been arrested. 11 days after Ashley was last seen, on July 17th, Chris was arrested for stealing a woman's purse while she was at the Lake Fair Parade in Olympia. Chris gave a fake name, Raymond M. Price, which was actually the name of a relative of his, so the system did not flag him as being wanted out of Missouri. He told the police at the time that he was living in a shelter and he was looking for work, though we do know he spent some of his time living with his cousin in the area. Chris was given a court date for this charge and released. Of course, he didn't show up for that court date, so an arrest warrant was issued for, quote, Raymond Price. In the meantime, the police in Missouri were looking for Christopher Hart. They knew he fled the jurisdiction and was possibly connected to a missing teenager, so they were looking for him with more effort than usual with a failure to appear warrant. On September 7th, with the St. Joseph authorities and the Olympia authorities having figured things out and realized that Raymond Price and Chris Hart were the same person, they tracked Chris down and took him into custody. And when they did, Ashley was not with him. According to the cousin Chris was staying with, there was never anyone with Chris. He showed up in Olympia alone. They even asked the neighbors of the cousin, and none of them ever saw a teenager around the house. Not only was Ashley not with Chris, but it appears at some point he had ditched the car he was driving as well. There was an early attempt made to talk to Chris about Ashley, but it looks like he refused to say anything. He wouldn't even deny involvement. And while in jail in Washington, he started behaving a bit erratically. He was refusing medication, and he wouldn't come out of his cell at all. He was sent to the state hospital for a psych eval before he could be arraigned, and in the meantime, he decided to also try to fight extradition to Missouri. This all led to delays, and Chris remained held in Washington for about 6 months. He was returned to Missouri in custody in early April 2005. He had a probation hearing set for April 27th, but according to the documents based on representations of the defense counsel and the court's own observations, they wanted a full mental health examination done before they moved forward. It doesn't spell out what these observations were about his behaviors, but they were right on the money because Chris went through 4 years of evaluations, commitments, and attempts at treatment before he was deemed competent to proceed. This, of course, led to delay after delay in the probation revocation case, but both the state and the defense agreed to these continuances. It wasn't until April 2nd, 2009 that they could proceed. And it was found that Chris did violate his probation, and he was ordered to serve out the remainder of his sentence on that original assault charge. During this in-between time with Chris in custody but not deemed competent yet, we have two important pieces of information that came out. One we've known about for years, but the other was only released publicly within the last few years. In July of 2005, a year after Ashley went missing, it was reported in the Kansas City Star that Chris had stopped by someone's house the day Ashley disappeared. And they said his car was packed and he was going to pick up Ashley on his way out of state. While that article does not spell out who this was, someone did come forward to the media years down the road to say that she saw Chris that day, so this may have been her that the article was referring to. This woman, Julie, identified herself as Chris's cousin, though Chris's mom has said that's not true, that Julie is actually Chris's stepmother's niece, which in my world is a cousin, but I guess technically a step-cousin. They had a cousin-like relationship, and she even lived with Chris's father and stepmother for a period of time during her teen years when she was having her own rough patch with behaviors and such. My personal view is that Chris's mom is trying to distance him from Julie and imply she was lying about what happened. Anyway, Julie said she had seen Chris and Ashley together at his house twice before Ashley went missing. The first time she was just vaguely introduced to her, but the second time, which was a couple days later, Chris and Ashley were talking about going to Oregon. Julie thought it sounded like a good idea and wanted to go with them, so the three made plans together. Between that conversation and when they planned to leave, Julie said she was walking in the woods with Chris, and he made some weird comment to her about how he had once taken a girl out there. There was something about how he was saying it that creeped her out, so when he showed up on July 6th, to pick her up to head out west, Julie got cold feet. She told him she changed her mind and didn't want to go. So Chris left her house and went to the pool to pick up Ashley. So this is a witness saying that yes, Chris fully intended to take Ashley out of state with him. But the second piece of information that came out challenges this. This was not made public until 2021, but to explain it, we have to go way back and give some context. Chris had a son who I'm not going to name because clearly this has impacted his life in a negative way, and I don't want to contribute to that. But he was being raised by Chris's mother, Janice, and her husband in St. Joseph. Now, St. Joe is not a small town. It has a population of over 70,000, but it has a small town vibe to it. It's kind of hard to explain unless you've been to a place like this, but if something happens in St. Joe, everyone knows about it. So when Chris Hart was being named in the local paper as possibly being involved in the abduction of a St. Joe teenager, his son, who was 10 or 11 at the time, started getting picked on at school. To get him out of that environment, Janice went to a local private school to enroll him in the fall of 2005. The person she met with for intake was Denise Campbell, who had been previously an assistant principal at Ashley's middle school while Ashley attended there. When Janice explained the full situation about why she was putting her grandson in private school, according to Janice, Denise stood up from her chair, slapped the desk, and said she knew Chris hadn't taken Ashley because she saw Ashley in September of 2004, over 2 months after she was last seen at the pool. Janice was shocked and asked Denise if she told the police about it, and Denise said she did right when it happened. But the police shrugged her off, saying she must have been mistaken. But Janice assumed that the police were probably still quietly following up on the lead, and she didn't want to make any waves bringing it up because her grandson was already having so many issues with the situation. So she decided to let it go. But then in 2008, Chris reached out to his mom from jail for the first time in 4 years. She went ahead and told him what Denise had told her, and he passed the information on to his attorney. His attorney then contacted Denise to get an affidavit about what she saw. This affidavit is dated April 6th, 2009, just days after Chris was ordered back to prison for the probation violation. Just to keep the timeline clear, because that's what we do here, Ashley went missing in July of 2004. Denise said she saw Ashley in September of 2004. Then she told Janice about it about a year later, and then it was another 3.5 years before she wrote it out. This affidavit is short. She just said she was driving to pick her children up when she turned off Frederick Avenue and headed north on Leonard Road. Ashley was standing on the northeast corner of the intersection. On this corner is basically a church and a bus stop. Denise said she waved at Ashley, having recognized her because she was the assistant principal at her school, and Ashley waved back. She was standing there with a tall black man. After getting her kids, Denise was heading back down Frederick Street, this time going west. She passed Ashley and this unknown man again as they were also walking west on the bridge that crossed the highway. She wrote in her affidavit that she either reported it to the police or to juvenile services. And Janice noted in her own account of what happened that Denise's husband worked for the juvenile side of the prosecutor's office at the time. I fact-checked this, and a man with the same last name did work there. So Janice wondered if Denise spoke with investigators on Ashley's case, or did she just mention it to her husband and it never got passed on? It doesn't seem like the investigators knew about the supposed sighting, or at least the current ones didn't. Chris's mother released this affidavit in 2021 to the media. The St. Joseph News Press are the ones who got it, and they did contact Denise to verify that it was legit. When the investigators were asked about this affidavit, they said it took them by surprise. It's not entirely clear why Chris's family sat on it for so long. I mean, his mom initially didn't want it released because she didn't want to stir up any more issues for Chris's son with his peers and in school. But he was an adult for several years before she released it. It would have not only been useful in Chris's public defense in the media, it also could have helped Ashley's family in their attempts to find her. A sighting of Ashley by someone who knows her walking around St. Joe 2 months after she was reported missing is a huge deal. And we also know that when Chris made it to Washington, Ashley wasn't with him. This would open up the possibility that, like Julie, Ashley backed out from going west. But if that's what happened, then what happened next? Ashley decided both not to go with Chris, but also not to go home, and instead she just roamed around St. Joe. And how was Ashley walking around St. Joe in broad daylight with only one person seeing her? And then where has she been in the 20 years since then? I'm not saying that anyone is lying here, but I do think people can be mistaken. There were about 400 kids that attended the middle school, and even though Denise did have direct interactions with Ashley, was it possible she mixed her up with one of her friends and the person she was seeing was not Ashley. Unfortunately, because this was not investigated way back then, there's really no way to follow up on it. It's not like you can go to Ashley's friends and say, hey, on a random day in September 20 years ago, were you walking down the street? While the police have not really commented on the veracity of this sighting or if they consider it likely or not, they have said that Chris Hart is a lead, but he is not the only lead in this case. They've done foot searches in St. Joe, and they have gotten tips and sightings in both Missouri and Washington that they followed up on. It's very likely that most of the sightings came from these two places because those are the places where they are publicizing Ashley's missing persons information the most. As for Chris Hart, he did appeal his probation violation case, saying that they took too long to revoke his probation. He argued he was on probation for 3 years, and by the time this went to court, it was well outside that time frame. Therefore, he was no longer on probation. Now, this didn't go anywhere because while he was technically right that more than 3 years had passed if you go by a calendar, neither he nor his attorney objected to any of the delays in the proceedings. That time that he was being held for mental health evaluations and treatment basically paused everything. The clock stopped running on that issue, and so they were still within the time frame. But that doesn't mean that all the clocks stopped running. Chris was being detained while he was doing all of this mental health treatment, so he got credit for time served going back to his arrest in September of 2004. So then if you add that to the 15 months he initially served on the case and realize that Missouri generally has people serve about 80% of their sentences behind bars, this meant Chris was released again in August of 2015. The next month, he was arrested again, this time for tampering with a vehicle, and he ended up with a 5-year sentence. He was then released on probation in September of 2019. It is really interesting when you look Chris Hart up in the Missouri case lookup that you can tell when he was in prison because those are some of the only years he has no arrests on his record. In June of 2020, 9 months after his release, he was arrested again, this time for domestic violence and unlawful use of a weapon for attacking his then-adult son. While Chris was locked up in county jail in March of 2021, he made his first and I believe only statement on Ashley's disappearance, and it was to St. Joe's local media outlet, which is called the St. Joseph News Press in print and News Press Now on the internet. This interview came on the heels of his mother releasing the affidavit. The interview lasted 2 hours, and the journalist, Matt Hoffman, noted that Chris spent most of the interview on tangential legal matters. But the long and short of it was that Chris denied having anything to do with Ashley's disappearance. And he said if he did know anything, even if it implicated his own mother, he would tell the police. He said he was also writing a book called Person of Interest, in which he would go over everything he knew, including whether he even knew Ashley or not. This book, as far as I can tell, has not been released. Chris alluded to evidence that he would include in the book, but really, this interview feels like he wanted to air his grievances on unrelated matters, and he had to tease information about Ashley to get any attention. I'm not a fan of cat and mouse games like this, particularly when we're talking about a missing person, and I don't think the journalist here, Matt Hoffman, who did the interview, was either, because he didn't cover any of the details of Chris's interview, aside from what had to do with Ashley. As for Ashley's family, they would have liked to know about Denise's sighting earlier. They've been doing their own work looking for Ashley, and this certainly would have helped. But Denise said to News Press Now that she was not interested in doing an interview, that the affidavit spoke for itself. So there was no opportunity to ask her why did she not call Ashley's family to let them know directly what she saw. And the same with Chris's mother. She knew about the sighting back in the fall of 2005. She didn't tell Ashley's family. She didn't tell anyone until she released it to the media in 2021. Janice died in 2022, so we can't ask her why she held it back. I just can't imagine how frustrating it was for Ashley's family to have this major piece of information that they could have followed up on not released to them. The investigators have said that Ashley's case often has active periods, even 20 years on, because new tips will come in. They have dental records and maternal DNA on file for comparison to Jane Doe remains, though the family, of course, hopes the answer will not be found that way. But they are realistic, and they've said they want Ashley back under any circumstances. In my personal view on this case, I do not think Ashley planned to be gone for long. I think it's possible she didn't know this was the day Chris was going to, quote, take her to California, which is why she didn't sneak anything out of the house to bring with her. I also think the trip to California was never meant to be a permanent move. I think she was leaving in the summer when she didn't have school so she could go see California and come back. But something happened that changed those plans. At the time she went missing, Ashley Martinez was 15 years old, 5'3" and 110 pounds. Today, she would be about to celebrate her 36th birthday as I record this. Giving those ages sometimes really gets to me. I usually do my crying over cases off mic, but that one just hit me. It's that life that is lived or should be lived from 15 to 36. So much time lost. Okay, and thanks to the power of editing, I am back and composed. Ashley was last seen wearing white Reebok sneakers with red accents, a ring with 2 hearts joined together, jean shorts, and a black top with a black bikini printed with red cherries under her clothing. If you have any information, you can contact the St. Joseph Police Department at 816-238-TIPS. That's TIPS, and this number will be in the show notes.